Hi, everybody. I'm Terry Karen, and I'm the president of Murray Hill Institute, and I want to welcome you here tonight because we have a really lovely presentation for you. We have Dr. Ann Brodeur here from North Dakota, where she just told me that it was 35 degrees below zero yesterday. So I want to tell you a little bit about Ann before we get going. Dr. Ann Brodeur is a social historian of the medieval world, professor of history at the University of Mary in North Dakota, where she's speaking to us tonight. Ann has, in addition to teaching courses on history, medieval culture, and religion, and the history of education, has also published papers and book chapters on subjects as diverse and wide-ranging as anthropology, law, economics, and education. Ann's also been an advisor and board member of many nonprofit initiatives that support the development of the dignity of work and women and children. She currently serves as an administrative chair for the languages and literature at the University of Mary and as faculty representative to the NCAA. So we are very excited to have Ann here tonight because I know most of you, like me, are ready to get out and start inviting people in and getting our whole social life ready. So without any more talk by me, I want to everyone please welcome Dr. Ann Brodeur.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me. So I'm Ann Brodeur. I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm a homemaker, I'm an academic, I'm an administrator. I live right now it's still sunny here in North Dakota. It is a bit less chilly than minus 35, but it's still sunny out. And so I'll take that any day. So I'm an assistant professor of history and the director of the master's program in Catholic Studies. Most people probably have an idea of what a professor of history might do. I specialize in medieval history, but you might wonder, what on earth is Catholic Studies? It's the study of the Catholic tradition with an eye towards integrating that great tradition in our personal and professional lives. And so that it'll transform our daily work and our ordinary life. So I teach courses on everything like the history of Western education to hot topics like sex and gender, from the church's perspective to the history of hospitality. So I teach all sorts of courses. The University of Mary is a Benedictine university, and the Benedictines have a lot to say about hospitality. And in fact, it's one of our university's guiding values. Way back in the 6th century, St. Benedict told Christians that they should receive others and they should receive strangers as Christ. So, but that's not a new thing. Caring for strangers seems to have been a deep human impulse that becomes a path to holiness through the Christian tradition, but it existed long before that. It seems to have been a moral imperative from traditions as wide-ranging as, ancient Chinese tradition, ancient Indian tradition, all the way forward into ancient Greek, ancient Mesopotamian. So, in fact, caring for strangers and caring for the vulnerable seems to have been a moral imperative in most ancient cultures. So the ancient Mesopotamians and the Greeks and the ancient Chinese and the ancient Persians all held up the idea of hospitality as a necessary duty. And it was especially something that made us human, that hospitality was something that somehow distinguished us from all other creation, that we could look to the needs of another and care for them in a way that other creatures couldn't. It's also important to note that even in the ancient world, as in our world today, maybe less so, there weren't, any hotels or restaurants in the ancient world. And so if you were a stranger or somehow vulnerable, you had to find care in someone's home. And so this is about hospitality in homes. I don't want to necessarily talk about hospitality in like hotels, although that's a very valuable and beautiful sort of profession. I want to talk about our kind of hospitality, the hospitality and the work that we do in the home. My dog just walked in and wants to say hi, but we're going to ignore her for the moment. So tonight, I want to talk about two aspects of hospitality that we don't often think about. The first one is that I've come across in my research, and I'm going to share some stories from that research, is that hospitality is healing. And relatedly, that hospitality is about vulnerability in an often brutal and brutalizing world. And I want to talk about these using stories from the ancients to illustrate what I mean. And then after I've done that, I want to take some time to offer some suggestions for thinking about and doing hospitality in our own day and age. So the first, hospitality as healing. So you might have been asked in high school or in college to read the Epic of Gilgamesh. And when you were in high school, you probably thought, oh my gosh, this is so weird. I don't understand why I'm doing this, blah, blah, blah. That's okay, that's fine. But it is the oldest written story that we have in the human record. And I'm a historian, so I love that kind of stuff. But for our purposes, there are some really interesting vignettes or little stories in there that can point to us, something about the nature of hospitality. So it tells some pretty fantastic tales about the hero Gilgamesh, and he has this comrade in arms, this friend named Enkidu. Enkidu is kind of a wild man. He's uncivilized. He's very powerful. He's very strong, but he lacks all of like the niceties of civilization, and they go on all sorts of crazy adventures. When we first meet Enkidu, he lacks all of the things that are needed to get on in society. He lacks language. He lacks knowledge of norms and customs. He doesn't know how to do things the right way. And in many ways, he is more like an animal than a man. And I'm kind of sensitive to this. One of my daughters is autistic, and she misses a lot of these, social sorts of cues. And so I think about this a lot. Like, what are the things that we need to get on in society? And so Enkidu is this kind of guy that just doesn't fit. He lacks language, he lacks norms, he lacks customs, he lacks manners, all this sort of stuff. He's strong and he's powerful like an ox, but he's vulnerable in his loneliness for human connection. And this is where I think we share a lot with Enkidu. He's still human. He lacks all of these things, but he still longs for connection. At one point in the epic, Enkidu is lost. He's wandering, he's alone, and he comes upon a village. And so you might have read this when you were in high school. He comes upon the village, and as a reader, you and I know that Enkidu is wild, and he might be unpredictable, and he's dangerous, and he's also a stranger to the village. And so this is a moment of suspense in the story. We're thinking, oh gosh, how will the village deal with him? Will they reject him? Will they try to kill him? Maybe they'll just ignore him and be indifferent to his plight as another human being. So what's going to happen here? And there's a really beautiful and touching scene in this story. A family from the village comes and welcomes this person who's possibly dangerous, definitely unpredictable, who's unintelligible. He doesn't speak a language, or at least he doesn't speak their language. And they welcome him into their home. And so over days and weeks, they teach him how to speak. They teach him social customs. They teach him language. They teach him manners, all the things necessary to have fruitful relationships with others. And so in many ways, Enkidu is kind of like the ultimate stranger. He doesn't have a home. He doesn't have any money. He's not got any power. He's not got any influence. He lacks basic familiarity with all the things we need to function in human civilization. He's totally alienated from society. And his lack makes him vulnerable. But this family is led to go beyond just mere hospitality. And by mere hospitality is like, here's some bread, here's a roof over your head. Rather, they welcome him in and they extend to him a kind of mercy. And that's the mercy of healing his vulnerabilities. They heal him. They give him all the things that he needs to really live a full life, to have social relationships, to really engage in human connection in a way that he could never do before. And so their hospitality heals him. He's able to be in relationship with them. He's able to be in relationship with others because someone took a risk and welcomed him in and gave of themselves to build up all of the things that he lacked. And they healed him of the things that kept him in loneliness. And so I look at that story and I think, wow, hospitality is no less healing in our own day. So many of our friends, our acquaintances, our coworkers suffer from a deep kind of loneliness. I don't know if you've read the book or you remember it. Jean Twenge is a sociologist who wrote the book iGen, and she came and spoke to our faculty a couple of years ago. And she was talking about how, students and people are really super connected, and, they're hooked up on phones left and right. And they give the appearance of being happy, and they give the appearance of having a fulfilling life, but it's on carefully curated Instagrams. And so they give this great appearance, but in fact, they're really lonely, deeply lonely in many ways. And this is, true for students, and this is true for 20-something, 30-something, 40-somethings, 50-somethings. Social media can imitate connection, but it is in fact just mimicking something that we actually really deeply need in real life. And so no amount of likes is going to fill that deep longing for connection, for really feeling like we've been seen, right? So we've got to take the risk. We've got to invite friends out for coffee, or we've got to invite them in for brunch. And when we do that, we have to keep in mind that we're engaging in an act of healing. It might not feel like that to have somebody over for, I don't know, cookies and coffee or a croissant and, whatever. But you are in fact engaging in a work of healing. The fact that we've set aside an hour or two just for our friend, and in that hour, we've listened really well, we've sympathized, we've encouraged, we've helped them grow in hope and optimism. That's a thing that helps them to heal and grow. And it also helps us to grow as well. So when we extend hospitality, it's always a win-win. By giving of our time and ourselves to our friends, we receive as well. We offer something that can be very healing for them, but then we in turn receive that as well. So that's my first point tonight, is that hospitality is an act of healing. And it's one that we shouldn't overlook. It's sometimes I think we think of hospitality as like social niceties, or we think of it as, some sort of like artificial thing that's all about like externals and, whether you've got the right teacups or you've got, I don't know, the right kind of food, but that's not what's happening. What's happening that's real is really below the surface, and it's at the level of the soul, and it's at the level of the person. And so when we're engaged in hospitality, real authentic hospitality, we're actually engaged in an act of healing. And this seems, really especially true as we are slowly beginning to emerge from COVID isolations in various parts of the country. That's my dog crying. She sees another dog. Some people have fared pretty well. Some people have pretty thick social networks. They've got pretty thick, ways to rely on people. But others, they really took a mental and physical beating. Their mental health has really suffered badly. Their physical health might have taken a beating. And so they might feel kind of afraid coming out of isolation. And I know for myself that getting back into social life again seemed a little bit daunting. I'm an introvert, I'll fully own that. And the pace that I used to keep up prior to COVID, I'm trying to get back up to that again. And I'm like, wow, this is really tiring. But if we think of hospitality as an act of healing, both of ourselves and another, then that makes the effort to put ourselves out there really worthwhile. So that's point number one. Hospitality is an act of healing. It's worth it. We should do it. Even if we're feeling a little overwhelmed by getting back into society and you're trying to remember, okay, how does this work again? How do I do this? It's worth all of those little efforts to do it. So the second story I'd like to tell has to do with vulnerability. And it comes from a great tale of longing for home and wanting to feel at home. And this is the Odyssey. You probably had to read this in high school or college. And the Odyssey is about Odysseus, who is a Greek king who's trying to get back home to his kingdom after the conclusion of the Trojan Wars. And his ship is blown off and he's blown out to sea. And he spends the next 25 years trying to get home. And he's relying on the kindness of many strangers to provide for his needs. And he's kind of like Enkidu from our previous story. He's like the paradigmatic, vulnerable stranger, no money, a foreigner traveling in foreign lands. I mean, some of us maybe have been there in our travels abroad where we're like, wow, funds are low. I don't speak the language. What do I do? He makes it back home finally to Ithaca, his homeland, and he's unsure of what he's going to find. And so he decides, I'm not going to announce myself as king. And he chooses to enter as a stranger. And in fact, nobody recognizes him. It's been 25 years for one thing. We all look really different 25 years later. And he finds his old servant, Eumaeus. And Eumaeus has been demoted to a swineherd, and he lives in a broken down hut. And Eumaeus doesn't recognize him, but he takes him in anyway. And he says kind of, to himself when he welcomes Odysseus in, he says something very poignant. He says, all strangers and beggars are from Zeus, which is very similar to the Christian idea that all strangers, all guests are Christ. So Eumaeus gives what little he has, even his own food. He gives him his own bed. He gives him his own cloak as a covering. He has nothing to share. He just gives literally his bed, his food, his cloak, and he chooses to go without. And then eventually he realizes that Odysseus is the missing king, and he recognizes them by little gestures he makes, by a specific scar that he has. He knew him and he knows him and he recognizes him. And in this little story, they're both revealing their vulnerability to each other. And this is where it relates to us. Eumaeus welcomes him into a less than perfect house. It's a hut, right? He's a swineherd. It's not fancy. He welcomes him into a less than perfect house, and he has nothing but a serving of porridge, and he has nothing but a ratty old cloak to share. And so he welcomes him into a less than perfect house with less than perfect food, with less than perfect decor. And he says, come on in. And Odysseus is also vulnerable. So Eumaeus, could think, oh, what is he going to think of my house? My hut. And Odysseus is also vulnerable. He has no money. And even though he's a king, no one recognizes him or supports him. And so they're both vulnerable with one another, and they share their hopes and their dreams. They even share their own poverty with one another. And then in doing so, they remember and reclaim their old friendship. So I think there's a lesson for us in this old story as well. Opening up our homes means opening up our hearts. And hospitality isn't about impressing people. It's about knowing and being known in true friendship. And this involves being vulnerable and being real. On the part of the host, this means that you're going to welcome somebody into a home or an apartment or whatever, that you wish were a little bit fancier maybe, or welcoming them in and wishing that you knew how to cook fancier food or whatever. So there's vulnerability on the part of the host, of us as hostesses. There's also vulnerability on the part of the person coming in. They're coming because they want to be received. They want to be kind of received and understood and welcomed and loved. And so, again, hospitality isn't about impressing people. It's about knowing someone and being known by them in true friendship. And this involves being vulnerable and being real. And so it's about not waiting for the perfect time to come for the Instagram apartment, for Instagram worthy, table spread, the right dishes, whatever. It's about, being real with one another. So true hospitality is really radical. It prioritizes the person. It's not the meal. It's not the house. It's not the clothes. It's not any other kind of external. Now, I don't want to say that externals are unimportant. I mean, they are important insofar as they help guests feel comfortable or feel honored. It's important to clean our homes and make them havens for people that dwell there. But sometimes it's better to offer scruffy hospitality like Eumaeus than to turn a friend away. So sometimes prudence demands that if a friend seems down or needs an ear, that we should let them into our apartments, even though there's laundry on the couch and there might be, like in my case, dog hair on things, or there's an odd assortment of condiments and a random jar of olives in your fridge. You still welcome them in and have that moment of vulnerability with one another. You see my house, I see your heart. So sometimes we confuse, again, hospitality with having the right table settings, the right food, the right decor, and we limit hospitality to externals. And we might say, I can't possibly have anybody over, my apartment's a mess, or I can't possibly have anybody over, I don't have any money to buy gourmet or to cater in or whatever. Or I can't possibly have anybody over, my place is a dump compared to so-and-so's. It's better to have people over in an apartment or a home that's less than perfect, for food that's not gourmet, because the people that come are there to be seen, and they're there to be loved in good conversation and in friendship. We want to give our friends a comfortable experience, so we do want to welcome them into a clean home, and we do want to do our best in the kitchen, but let's not confuse comfortable with perfect on Instagram, or our best in the kitchen with gorgeous on Pinterest. The goal and the aim of hospitality is to welcome a stranger and have them leave as a friend, to welcome an acquaintance and have them leave as a friend, or to welcome a friend and have them leave something like a sister. So I want to close out and then open it up for discussion with one last story from the book of Genesis. So I'm revealing that I'm a total Catholic. I think it's Genesis 18. Abraham is sitting out in the shade of his tents, and it's blazing hot midday. and he sees three strangers approaching. And for Abraham, the ancient duties that applied to the people in the Odyssey and that apply to the people in Gilgamesh also apply to him. And so he offers them water to drink. And then he, calls to his wife, Sarah, and says, hey, quick whip up some bread. I don't know that I could quick whip up any bread. And then he says to a servant, quick, go slaughter a goat. And he offers them a meal on the fly, right? And what happens? A blessing happens. Sarah, who is up until this point been barren, is blessed with a child. And there's great blessing that comes forth from this, such that, St. Paul will say later on in the New Testament that sometimes we entertain angels unaware. And so the last point I want to really leave us with in thinking and talking about hospitality is that there is always some sort of blessing that comes with it. That when we put ourselves out there for a friend or even for an acquaintance and we welcome them in, that it's going to be healing for them, it's going to be healing for us. We're going to meet someone in their vulnerability and they're going to meet us. There's always some sort of blessing that comes from extending ourselves as best as we can in the circumstances that we've got. And that risk is always rewarded. It never returns to us empty. And so I think that's my encouragement to all of us as we are kind of emerging from COVID is to not be afraid of welcoming in others. That there's great things that come from this. There are great benefits, psychological, in terms of our mental health or spiritual health, our physical health, that come from being in connection with others. We were made for others, and we belong to each other. And so hospitality is a way of recognizing that. And I just encourage all of us, myself included, to really try and do our best to push against those things that would make us lonely in this life, and to really give ourselves openly to hospitality. So I think I will leave it there for discussion and questions.